Hey everyone, greetings. It's nearly 6 o'clock. This is often a good time to do our Bible readings live, our Geneva Bible, 1560 Geneva Bible readings live. So please get a glass of wine, get a cocktail. I don't care, I'm not judging. Get some apple juice, get some tea, make yourself comfortable, and let's go ahead and pick up again with the Geneva Bible. Those of you who are following along know that we reached Leviticus 1, and Leviticus is the third book of the Hebrew Bible after Genesis and Exodus. So we started in the garden, and then we went through the horrible years of slavery in Egypt, and then we wandered in the desert, and we built the golden calf, and we disobeyed God, and Moses was very upset, and the 10 Commandments were shattered, and then he got another set. And, we've moved on learning, and the theme always, and I'll let you know if it's another theme, but so far very consistently is God is really, really trying. The joke I often make with these readings in Hebrew is the lesson about human beings is he's just not that into you, meaning God is really, meaning us, right? God is really trying to establish a love relationship with us. He wants that more than anything. Who knows what else is going on in God's existence, but in terms of this planet Earth, we don't know what's going on with the animals, right, and their consciousness. But when it comes to human beings, this story, according to this story, is God is really trying to teach humans how to be in a love relationship with him that is willing, voluntary, conscious, and reciprocal. And he's also really trying, but this is secondary. It's really interesting that later religions made it primary because that gave the intermediaries and the, establishment, priesthood power. But it's really a secondary theme. It's a really important one. But the secondary theme after God trying to be in a relationship with us, loving us, letting us know what he needs, to be in a love relationship. The secondary theme is trying, not in a punitive way, but in a this is how the world works, my beloved children way, to show us that when we align with his 10 commandments or the Noahide laws, the 7 commandments, our lives will be blessed. And that when we forget him, and we've talked about what to forget means or to remember in the Hebrew context, it's more like keeping your heart, right? It's not cognitive, it's more emotional. When we remember God's wishes, right? Not just God, but like what it means to be in relationship with God, we won't go astray. And when we forget, and just put our own kind of will and judgment and, all the things humans do, lust and, cruelty and grudge holding and pettiness and ego, then we go off the path, and then horrible things can happen. But again, it's not punitive. It's more like, and I'm going to say this over and over, forgive me if it's repetitive, but it seems very important. If you use metaphor a lot, it's really like God is trying to teach teenagers to drive, and the teenager can say, if I just go through a red light, it's, it'll be fine. But the grown-up who has been driving forever, since time existed, who made time, right, is trying to say, no, darling, if you go through a red light, it's going to be really dangerous. So just keep that in mind. Now, we're already getting some wonderful questions and comments. Jeffrey Gavin asks, am I establishing an ongoing study weekly? Jeffrey, I owe it to all of you to do this regularly so we can all be live when we want to together. It's been sporadic. Some weeks I do it multiple times a week. Other weeks go by and I don't do it. So I will try to establish regularity, but it won't be weekly. It'll be, if anything, bi-weekly or 3 times a week at the dinner hour, because if we go too long, we lose the thread. I lose the thread. I mean, not that I forget, but that I'm not like in the groove. And T.A. Woody says, does anyone know a good Geneva Bible app to use? That is a great question and a great idea. I don't. And I've actually reached out to the people who publish the giant hardcover Geneva Bible, but I haven't heard back from them, not about an app, just letting them know I'm doing this. You're welcome, Jeffrey. But there is something exciting has happened since we began this study together, which is there didn't used to be a PDF version of the 1560 Geneva Bible that I could find online, which was problematic because I was always having to bring my gigantic physical book everywhere I went. But someone, let's see who this is. This is, it doesn't say. It says Chrome extension. Someone has put Leviticus.pdf up on the internet, and now we have the 1560 Geneva Bible, I should say, on the internet in a PDF format. It's not in the Elizabethan text, but I think there's even a PDF with the Elizabethan text. But honestly, as long as it's the PDF version, you're not losing, much of anything by reading it in a modern lettering font rather than the Elizabethan font. The Elizabethan font, is, I've often explained, is quite difficult if you're not trained to read. So party on with that PDF. It's a real public service, whoever did that. And I will definitely suggest to the Geneva Bible publishers, I hope they get my emails, that they should put out an app, because that is a literally genius idea. All right, folks. I'm not going to recap the history of the Geneva. Well, I will for a minute, because some of you are joining us for the first time. The Geneva Bible is a really extraordinary Bible, the 1560 version, not the 1599, because it was the Founders' Bible, the Puritans' Bible, Thomas Jefferson's Bible, and it was translated from the Hebrew as opposed to prior Bibles in English translated from the Greek or the Latin, by a group of reforming dissidents, Protestants, right? And again, I never privilege one religion over another, except maybe I don't like Satanism, but, well, I certainly don't like Satanism, but, the 16th century was, of course, a time of great conflict in which some reformers were trying to criticize the corruption of the Roman Catholic Church at that time. And there was, a massive split. It tore England apart. And there were, of course, some Catholic monarchs and some Protestant monarchs during that century in England, and they were killing each other, and there was war. And it was very dangerous. These fights, these arguments were very passionate and could lead to, death. And so these handful of Protestant reformers at that time, there weren't Protestant sects in the way that there are now. They were just beginning. But they went to Geneva, Switzerland, where it was safe to be a Protestant reformer. And they sat and translated from the Hebrew. And so I love the 1560 Geneva Bible translation. Well, as you know, if you've come on this journey, but for newcomers, the 1560 Geneva Bible translation is much closer to the Hebrew than any subsequent translation I've ever read. And the constant theme, the constant discovery we make chapter after chapter is that in the Hebrew and in the Geneva Bible translation of 1560, God is different than later translations present him as being. Later translations, increasingly, but really, from the King James Bible on, as beautiful as that is, the translators would, I'm not going to say err, because they're often not really errors, but choices, right? Translation choices. They would choose words that prioritized the church or the priesthood, the authority, the intermediary, and downplay the incredibly intimate one-to-one relationship that humans have with God in the Hebrew and in the 1560 Bible, Geneva Bible. So that is constant. And the other striking thing is that God's personality in Hebrew and in the 1560 Geneva Bible, which explains so much history, right? It explains why the Puritans, were happy to, I mean, not happy, but willing to sail across a terrifying ocean to a whole new world and, start a completely different kind of society than the one they'd left. God is much nicer in the original. God is a completely different personality in the original, in the Hebrew and in the 1560 translation, where God in later translations is distant and judgmental and arbitrary and kind of cruel or sadistic in places, or just you can't figure out what his motivations are. In the Hebrew and in the 1560 Geneva Bible, that is not God's personality at all. We're only, 3 books in, so I may change my view as we go along. I have never read the whole Hebrew Bible in Hebrew until now, from cover to cover. But so far, God is very human, right? And so humans are very God-ish. They're very similar personalities. God needs love. God is lonely. God cares for us. God is trying to help us. God understands us. I mean, God has a sense of humor. It's extraordinary. And the overwhelming message is there's nothing too small that you're going through for God to worry about. Like literally, there's nothing too trivial. There's nothing he doesn't know. There's nothing that's bothering him for you to bring to him. And I'm not just making that up. It's in the text. And that's totally changed my own kind of relationship to God, because literally, I'll think, well, there's something I'm really suffering from or something I'm really worried about. In the past, I might have thought, well, God's busy, or this isn't that big a deal. But now I know that, his capacity really isn't the same as our capacity. And he does want to know if something really trivial, I mean, he knows already, right? But, he wants us to articulate this thing that I think no one cares about, certainly not God. I'm bringing to you because literally that's the kind of relationship he wants with us. It blew my mind. I mean, I can never forget that section in Exodus where Moshe is saying to God, I really can't take on this leadership role that you have prepared for me. It's too much for me. I'm slow of speech, which could mean I stammer. I'm just not a good public speaker. And God's like, I need your mouth. Like that is literally one of the moments where God actually kind of has a sense of humor. You can feel this personality of, come on, I'm your parent, I'm your creator, I love you, I made your mouth, I know what's going on with you, I know your challenges with speech, I made you, I made your mouth, right? So that's like carries through all the way through. So now we're at a really interesting moment, and I shared in the last reading Leviticus 1 very transparently, because why lie to you guys, right? I mean, I try not to lie ever, partly because I've read the first 2 books of the Hebrew Bible, and I know there's no point in doing any of those things because we only hurt ourselves. But also, I just want to be very, honest, because I think a lot of Bible reading is kind of performative. I'm just going to say it. I do. A lot of people, I have not been drawn to a lot of Bible reading contexts in any religion, right? And I've been exposed to a lot of them because I feel like there's an element of theater, one way or another. Like, aren't we good, or we're so holy, God likes us better. And I just really wanted to join together with the community to really just find out what God said, and what was the story, right? Like, just go to the text and understand it. And along those lines, along those lines, I think Bible reading contexts are often not very honest or don't make a safe space for the problems we have with reading the Bible. And I'm not going to speak for you. Maybe you effortlessly read the Bible all day long or every day. And, great if you do. I don't. And I don't. I have some challenges and I've had some challenges. And one of the reasons I put off, I'll just put it out there. Don't strike me with a thunderbolt, please. One of the reasons I procrastinated with starting Leviticus after the incredible poetry and drama of Genesis and Exodus is that I knew from many high holy days or Shabbat services, sitting in temple, leafing through the 5 books of Moses, that Leviticus was very boring, or it seemed superficially very boring in many places. Or I shouldn't say boring so much as very technical, very detail oriented. This is how you do the sacrifice. This is how you build the altar. This is instructions, like operating instructions for, well, I thought at that time for starting a religion. Now I understand it's for establishing and formalizing a relationship with God, with the children of Israel, who, as you know, I see as not an exclusive people in relation to God, but a model that God is using. Like with us, he showed this is what it looks like, and then broadened that mandate. I will argue when we get to the New Testament, but it's not I'm not reading this like only Jews matter. I'm reading it, and it seems in the text to be, okay, I'm going to choose you to demonstrate, not I'm going to choose you as better than anyone else. I think, and I've made this case, he makes clear that the chosenness only goes along with behavior. It's an ethical commitment. It's not an ethnic commitment or an ethnic kind of accident of birth. Leaving that aside, when I started to actually read Leviticus, and I will tell you, starting again is like taking a deep breath and jumping into what I know will be a pool of cold water. I have found, and it's only 1 chapter in, but I just read the next 2 chapters, that it's like there's something about the text, especially in Hebrew, that opens up and opens up, when you are willing to move into it. And lots of people have described that. It's kind of magical. But the more I read, again, especially in the Hebrew, not at all in the RSV, I have to say, and in the 1560 Geneva Bible, the more it's kind of bloom like a living thing. So I'm going to read 2 and 3 of Leviticus. They are technical. They're about how you make sacrifices or offerings. That's an interesting question. What is the word? To God. But what you're going to see is that it's much more like, how do you come near him materially, using things you may have in your camp with your friends in the desert, right? And so it's much more like, how do you give God a Valentine? And the other thing we're going to see is there's a word, karov, which means near. But you know that when I've read the Hebrew to you in the past, some chapters will have repetitions of a Hebrew word over and over and over, and puns, like multiple iterations of that Hebrew word in different contexts. And so what that communicates is like a sense of poetry, but also almost a code, like, this is what this chapter is really about. It seems like it's about how to make a sacrifice, but this is what it's really about. And that word, as you will see, is karov, lahakriv, makriv, korban, right? Which is an interestingly, I thought, different word, but it turns out to come from the same root, which means either sacrifice or offering. But it actually comes from the same root, which is to near, to draw near. Isn't that interesting? And so the theme of these 2 chapters actually is not something boring and technical. It's actually, how do you draw near to God? You're going to draw near to God. This is how you draw near to God. And that's just so mind-blowing. So let's get started, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, and bear with me. Grab your Leviticus PDF, if you can, from the 1560 Geneva Bible online. Open your text. And I'm going to read you what's called the argument, which we would call today the preface or the introduction, because, as you know, the editors of the 1560 Geneva Bible kind of explained these sections in ways that are very accessible and interesting. They're very Christian, right? So it's not going to speak to every listener, but it's very kind of down to earth and matter of fact. And you can really feel in these comments and notes and in this introduction why the Puritans existed, right? Because they're like, oh, here we are. God wants us right here in the middle of the action. All right. The third book of Moses, called Leviticus, the argument. And again, this is the introduction. It's not the text. As God daily, by most singular benefits, declared himself to be mindful of his church, so he would not, meaning he did not want, that they should have any occasion to trust either in themselves or to depend upon others for lack of temporal things or aught, meaning anything that belonged to his divine service and religion. Therefore, meaning as a result, he ordained different kinds of oblations and sacrifices, offerings and sacrifices, to assure them of forgiveness of their offenses if they offered them in true faith and obedience. So here's one of those mind-blowing moments. Sacrifices aren't for God, they're for us to assure, because we're human and we're dumb, right? And so by doing this ritualistic thing, we can know that we've been forgiven, even though he's forgiven us, right? If they've offered them in true faith and obedience. And the point that Jesus later explained is that's the issue. Like, did you offer them in true faith and obedience? It's not the dead cow or the dead, sheep. It's where was your heart when you did this? Also, he appointed their priests and Levites, their apparel, clothing, offices, roles, conversation, and portion, meaning like what priests receive. He showed what feasts they should observe and in what times. Moreover, he declared by these sacrifices and ceremonies that the reward of sin is death, and that without the blood of Christ, the innocent lamb, there can be no forgiveness of sins. So in that iteration, these editors are definitely reading back in history, because in the Hebrew Bible, those things hadn't chronologically happened yet, but that's their interpretation. And because they should give no place to their own inventions, which thing God most detests, as appears by the terrible example of Nadab and Abihu, which we'll get to, he prescribed even to the least things, the smallest things, what they should do, as what beasts, animals they should offer and eat, what diseases were contagious and to be avoided, what order they should take for all manner of filthiness and pollution, whose company they should flee, what marriages were lawful, and what politic laws were profitable, meaning helpful, useful, which things that declared, he promised favor and blessing to them that kept his laws, and threatened his curse to them that transgressed them. So that's the introduction to the whole section of Leviticus. So let's go on. When I talked about how later translations prioritize the priests, even in the name of this book, Leviticus, you can see that, because even though I love the Geneva Bible 1560, it's still a Christian, translation, early modern Christian translation. And so they're lifting out the Levites, the priests. But in Hebrew, it's called Vayikra, and he called. And it probably is the start of one of the sections, probably the first chapter starts Vayikra. All right. So chapter 2, and the subheadline is, the meat offering is after three sorts, meaning of three kinds, of fine flour unbaken, meaning that was later translated to unleavened, of bread bacon, and of corn in the ear. And remember, at this time, corn means wheat. It's not New World maize, which is what we think of when we talk about corn. All right. And when any will offer a meat offering unto the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil upon it and put incense thereon, and shall bring it unto Aaron's sons the priest, and he shall take thence his handful of the flour and of the oil, and with all the and of the oil with all the incense, and the priest shall burn it for a memorial upon the altar. For it is an offering made by fire for a sweet savor unto the Lord. But the remnant, meaning the rest, of the meat offering shall be Aaron's and his sons, for it is most holy of the Lord's offerings made by fire. If you bring also a meat offering, bacon, meaning baked in the oven, it shall be an unleavened cake of fine flour mingled with oil, or an unleavened wafer anointed with oil. But if your meat offering be an oblation of the frying pan, it shall be a fine flour unleavened, mingled with oil. And you shall part it in pieces and pour oil thereon, for it is a meat offering. And if your meat offering be an oblation made in the cauldron, meaning iron pot, it shall be made of fine flour with oil. After you shall bring the meat offering that is made of these things unto the Lord, and shalt, meaning you shall, present it unto the priest, and he shall bring it to the altar. And that's the end of chapter 2 goes on, I beg your pardon. And the priest shall take from the meat offering a memorial of it, and shall burn it upon the altar, for it is an oblation made by fire for a sweet savor unto the Lord. But that which is left of the meat offering shall be Aaron's and his sons, for it is most holy of the offerings of the Lord made by fire. All the meat offerings which ye shall offer unto the Lord shall be made without leaven, for ye shall neither burn leaven nor honey in any offering of the Lord made by fire. In the oblation of the first fruits he shall offer them unto the Lord, but they shall not be burnt upon the altar for sweet savor. All the meat offerings also shall you season with salt, neither shall you suffer, meaning allow, the salt of the covenant of your God to be lacking from your meat offering, but upon all your oblations you shall offer salt. If then you offer a meat offering of your first fruits unto the Lord, you shall offer for your meat offering of your first fruits ears of corn dried by the fire, and wheat beaten out of the green ears. After you shall put oil upon it and lay incense thereon, for it is a meat offering. And the priest shall burn the memorial of it, even of that is beaten, and of the oil of it with all the incense thereof, for it is an offering unto the Lord made by fire. Now we're going to go to Vayikra, which is in the Hebrew, the Chabad translation. And you know that I usually totally agree with the Chabad translation with some minor, they can sometimes get a bit rabbinical too, even when the text doesn't justify it. So here's Vayikra chapter 2, and I want to call your attention to a few of these terms. V'nefesh ki takriv. So right away, it says v'nefesh. It's translated as and if a person, but it really means and if a soul, a spirit, right? You're a person, but you're a nefesh, a spirit. Ki takriv, that word karov, who draws near. Korban, and korban is an interesting word, which means, as I said, sacrifice or offering. But again, I didn't even know this. It comes from kerev, the root kerev, and all Hebrew words, as you know, have three consonants as a root. And what is kerev? To come near. So this is one of those mind-blowing puns, right? Ki takriv korban, the person, the soul, who draws near his sacrifice, who draws near his come nearness, right? That's what sacrifice comes from. It means to draw near, right? So it's not about, hurting yourself. It's about drawing near through a medium of, material objects. You're drawing near the presence of God. Isn't that amazing? Mincha, a meal offering, an offering, l'Adonai, to God, soletiye, fine flour it will be, karbano, his sacrifice. Again, that word, v'yatzak aleha shemen, and he'll pour oil on her, v'natan aleha levana, and he will give upon her frankincense. And I hope you can hear the melody of these words, the beauty of these words. And he shall bring it to Aaron's descendants, the Kohanim. And then I want to look at this other word on paragraph 2. Then the Kohen shall cause its memorial to go up in smoke on the altar. It is a fire offering with a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. Let's see what that is in Hebrew. Vehaktira Kohen et azkarata. And the Kohen will cause et azkarata, the memorial. It's a really interesting word. Zocher is to remember, so that's the root azkarata, but it's a memorial, but it's more like a souvenir, right? Hamazbecha, the altar word, toward the altar. But again, that word mazbeach, I looked it up again, it means altar or it means place of slaughter. Ishe reach, fire word, the wind, nichoach laAdonai, pleasing to God. And you remember from the last chapter, reach nichoach laAdonai is this beautiful phrase, which means it's translated as a sweet savor to the Lord. And in English, you can really think like, what is God up to? Why does he need a sweet savor? That's kind of weird. But in Hebrew, reach nichoach, because it's a pleasing wind, it's also a pleasing spirit, right? We have talked about how in the Hebrew version of Matthew, the Holy Ghost is Reach HaKadosh. And so it can mean like a divine spirit, right? So it's much more than just a good smell. Reach nichoach laAdonai. Veha noteret, and what remains, ha mincha laHaron, the meal offering, will belong to Aaron, ulevanav, and to his kids. Kodesh Kadashim, holy of holies, right? Kodesh Kadashim. Kadosh means holy. Kiddush is the prayer that you say for the dead. It means holy. Lekadesh means to make holy. We talked earlier about how in Hebrew and in Judaism, you've got this idea that humans have the power lekadesh, to make holy, by doing certain things that God told them to do in the material world. They can make food holy. They can make themselves holy. They can make sex holy, right? And that's not really a concept that exists. Maybe consecrate, maybe like communion, humans can consecrate, but later religions, and certainly a lot of Christian religions, really kind of arrogate the making holy. And this isn't a criticism, it's just observation, to priests and ministers, right? But here, this offering, your offering, right? Not the priest's offering, Kodesh Kadashim, it's the holiest of the holies, Me'ishe Adonai, and that's translated as fire offerings to the Lord, but it really means Esh is fire, so it really means of the fires of God. So it's really stressing you can make this animal you raised or this fruit you grew holiest of holies by giving it to God in this way. As you approach, it's translated as altar, but it could be the place of sacrifice. You do it yourself, okay? Viki tikriv, and he who will draw near, again, karban, the sacrifice or offering, again, that repetition, mincha me'afeh, an offering that's food baked in the oven, tanur is an oven, solet chalot, unleavened loaves, matzat belulot, and you recognize that word matzah, if you've ever been to a Passover Seder, we still say matzah for unleavened bread. Belulot bashemen verekikei matzot meshucham bashemen. So it's fine flour mixed with oil or unleavened wafers anointed with oil. And they translate it wafers. It's matzah, right? Anointed with oil. And then they talk about what to do with the bread. And you bring these meal offerings, veheveta, and you will bring et hamincha, the meal offerings, asher yaseh, which you will make, me'ele, from all of these, le'adonai, to God. You'll bring it to God. It's so direct. Vehakriva el hakohen, vehegisha el hamizbeach. So you see that word again, lahakriv, vehekriva, and will draw near the Kohen, right, the priest. And he will bring it to the altar or the place of sacrifice. So it's very interesting. Lehagish is to approach, and lehakriv is to draw near. And in this passage, they are definitely making a distinction between approaching and drawing near. So the priest is just approaching, right, physically, but you are drawing near. Okay. Veherim, and he'll lift out hakohen min hamincha, from within the meal offering, et azkarata, the memorial, vehiktir hamizbecha, and cause it to go up on the altar, ishe, fireword, reach nechoach laAdonai, a sweet savor to the Lord. And I'm sure you can translate this by now, some of these phrases yourself. And again, that repetition of that beautiful sentence, vehanoteret min hamincha leAharon, and the remains of the meal offering to God, to Aaron, velevanav, and to his sons, kodesh kadashim meishe Adonai, holy of holies, from the fires of God. And they do it with the fruit offering, l'reach nichoach, as a pleasing fragrance, as a sweet spirit. And let's look at the salt passage. V'chol korban, and all of your offerings, your near drawings, minchatcha, b'melech timlach, of your meal offerings, your sacrifices, but in salt you will salt them. Velo tashbit melach, and don't omit salt. Brit Elohecha, covenant of your God. Me'al minchatecha, from among your offerings. Al kol korbanecha, on all of your sacrifices or offerings. Takriv melach. Do you recognize that word? You will draw near salt. So they're saying this drawing near is the movement of this whole passage all the way down to the salt. Ve'im takriv, and if you draw near, minchat bikorim, the meal offering of first grains, laAdonai, to God, aviv kalui be'esh, you will bring your first meal offering as soon as it ripens to the fire. Gerish karmel takriv, again that word, parched over the fire, kernels full of their husks, ground into coarse meal. But you've got the word takriv again. This must be 5 or 6 iterations of the word takriv. Venatata aleha, and you will put upon her shemen, oil, Vesamta aleha, and you will put upon her levana, frankincense, minchahu, is an offering of meal. Vehaktir hakohen, and the Kohen will cause et azkarata, the memorial, the souvenir, migirsha umi shamna, to go up in smoke, and taken from its coarse meal and from its oil. Al kol levanta, with its frankincense, ishe l'Adonai, fireword to the Lord. It says a fire offering to the Lord, but it's really, in the fire to the Lord. And then we're just going to do one more. Did we read this in chapter 3? I don't think we did. Are you guys up for chapter 3? It's very short. It's only been 39 minutes, so we can go, usually we go a full hour. So there's more to say about this. And this says, the manner of peace offerings and beasts for the same, the Israelites may neither eat fat nor blood. That's the subhead. Now we read the text. Also, if his oblation be a peace offering, he will offer of the drove, meaning of the herd, whether it be male or female, he shall offer such as is without blemish before the Lord, and shall put his hand upon the head of his offering and kill it at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall sprinkle the blood upon the altar round about. So he shall offer part of the peace offerings as a sacrifice made by fire unto the Lord, even the fat that covers the inwards, meaning innards, and all the fat that is upon the innards. He shall also take away the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them and upon the flanks, and the gall, well, they have caul, but it's gall in our language, on the liver with the kidneys. Well, it could be actually caul, C-A-U-L. It is a membrane that covers the kidneys. And Aaron's sons shall burn it on the altar with the burnt offering, which is upon the wood that is on the fire. This is a sacrifice made by fire for a sweet savor unto the Lord. Also, if his oblation be a peace offering unto the Lord out of the flock, whether it be male or female, he shall offer it without blemish. If he offer a lamb for his oblation, then he shall bring it before the Lord, and lay his hand upon the head of his offering, and shall kill it before the tabernacle of the congregation. And Aaron's sons shall sprinkle the blood thereof round about upon the altar. After of the peace offerings he shall offer an offering made by the fire unto the Lord. He shall take away the fat thereof, and the rump altogether hard by the backbone, and the fat that covers the innards, and all the fat that is upon the innards. And he shall take away the 2 kidneys with the fat that is upon them, and upon the flanks, and the caul upon the liver with the kidneys. Then the priest shall burn it upon the altar as the meat of an offering made by fire unto the Lord. Also, if his offering be a goat, then he shall offer it before the Lord, and shall put his hand upon the head of it, and kill it before the tabernacle of the congregation. And the sons of Aaron shall sprinkle the blood thereof upon the altar round about. Then he shall offer thereof his offering, even an offering made by fire unto the Lord, the fat that covers the innards, and all the fat that is upon the innards. Also he shall take away the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, and upon the flanks, and the caul upon the liver with the kidneys. So the priest shall burn them upon the altar as the meat of an offering made by fire for a sweet savor. All the fat is the Lord's. This shall be a perpetual ordinance for your generations throughout all your dwellings, so that you shall eat neither fat nor blood. And I must say that puzzled me when I first read it, and I looked it up, because Orthodox Jews do eat fat. They sacrifice animals ritualistically, that is true. So do Muslims, Orthodox Muslims. But I didn't know that we weren't supposed to eat fat. And it turns out that, this is very typical of kind of rabbinical exegesis, it turns out that there are 2 words for fat. There's chelev, which is the word we just read, and there's shuman, or shemen. And shemen is oil, shuman, same root, is fat, like the fat of an animal. And the chelev you are forbidden to eat, and those are the very specific anatomical places that we just read about that are forbidden when you're sacrificing the animal, forbidden to eat. But that is not the same as shuman, which is other fat that is found in an animal that is kosher to eat if the animal was sacrificed in a kosher way and eaten in a kosher way, which we can talk about another time if you like. But this is the origin, all the way back here, thousands of years ago, is the origin of dietary laws that, many people around the world still observe. So now we're going to go to the Hebrew. And let's see what, if anything, leaps out there in chapter 3. Well, one thing I want to say is im zevach, if his offering, mazbeach. Remember, mazbeach is altar, but it's also place of sacrifice. So zevach is from that same root, the sacrifice he's making, or the slaughter that you're making. It's translated as peace offering here too, but it doesn't say peace off. Well, it sort of says peace offering, but it's literally zevach shlamim, offering of pieces in the plural. So again, it resonates with that idea that sacrifice is for us to be at peace, not really for God to smell something good. So it's so interesting. It's translated as a peace offering that sounds like God is always mad at us, and So we have to bring him a peace offering or he won't engage with us at all, let alone bless us. But that's not how it reads in the Hebrew. It really doesn't. It's ve'im zevach shlamim. It's like the offering of many iterations of peace, right? It's plural. So, but it doesn't say it's God, it's an offering to God, so God will be at peace. It really suggests that it's about peacefulness in the relationship or even peacefulness for the person offering it. It's got that implication, even though Hebrew very often lacks a lot of kind of like kinds of words that we have in English that indicate, of, to, etc. It's an offering of peace in the plural. Karbano, his sacrifices. Im min habakal hu makriv, again that word. If from the cattle he draws near, im zachar with a male, im nekeva with a female, tamim, and we talked about this word. It's translated as unblemished, but it could mean pure or innocent. Ve yekrivenu, it will be brought forward, that word again, lifnei Adonai, unblemished, pure, innocent, he'll draw near with it before God. Isn't that so intimate? Now, here's another thing. The English says he'll place his hand on the head of the sacrifice and slaughter it. Let's see what the Revised Standard Version says. Very neutral. The Revised Standard Version is, and he shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering and kill it at the door of the tent of meeting. But that's not really what it says in Hebrew. It says v'samach, and he places yado, his hand, al rosh karbano, on the head of his sacrifice or offering. Remember, it has both those meanings. Ve'ush chato, and he'll slaughter it, not kill it, slaughter it, which again gives the guy the priestly role. Petach ohel, at the opening of the tent, moed, of meeting. And remember that in the Revised Standard Version, this is translated as, tent of meeting, that's correct. But just note that it's the person himself who's doing the slaughtering at the tent of meeting. And Aaron's descendants, v'zarku b'nei Aaron, and they'll throw b'nei Aaron, the sons of Aaron, hakohanim, the priests, et hadam, the blood, al hamizbech, on the altar, saviv, around it. I mention this because the translation in English in the Chabad is, and he shall lean his hand forcefully upon the head of his sacrifice and slaughter it. What I want to say is, like, it's such a weird little detail, put your hand on the head of the animal you're going to slaughter. When you read it in Hebrew, it really has this resonance of don't be cruel. This animal's going to die. It may sense that it's in a bad situation and maybe about to die. It may have seen the weapon, whatever. But you want to reassure it before you slaughter it, which may sound mean, but it's less mean than leaving it alone and confused while you slaughter it. And a lot of things about kashrut and kosher animal butchery that I know very little about, but I know this much, are about avoiding cruelty to the animals. I believe the same is true of halal meat. I don't know anything about that beyond what I've heard. But here, I think the mention of put your hand on the head of the animal is to calm the animal down. Vehakriv, that word again, vehikriv, and draw near mizbach, hashalmim, and the offering of the plural of peace, ishe, toward the fire, la'adonai, toward God, et hachelev, the fat, that covers the innards and all the fat that's on the innards. So you see that he cleave over and over again, and they go into the fat. And down at line 6, ve'im min hatzon, and from the goats, karbano is his sacrifice, le zevach, from the flock, shlamim, again, pieces, la Adonai, multiple plural of peace to God, zachar o nekeva, male or female, tamim yekrivenu. Again, that word, male or female, the pure, the innocent, the blameless, the pristine, draw it near toward God. So in the Hebrew, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but it's all about repetition. You're being told, draw near to God, draw near to God, draw your animal near to God, draw your corn near to God, draw your bread near to God. And it's not like the priest will draw near to God for you. It's like, this is how you draw near to God. And here is this word again twice in line 7. Im Kesev, if it's a sheep, hu makriv, that word, he draws near. Et korbano, same root, his sacrifice, his offering. Hakriv, 3 times. Draw it near, oto lifnei Adonai, it before God. V'samach et yado, and he places his hand al rosh korbano, on the head of his offering. Shachat oto, and slaughter it lifnei ohel moed, in front of the tent of meeting. V'zarku b'nei Aaron et damo al hamizbeach saviv. And you hear the repetition of this, right? It's very incantatory. You'll slaughter it before the tent of meeting, and Aaron's children, sons, will dash its blood on the altar around. V'hikriv, again that word, and draw near. Mizbeach, the offering. Hashlamim, the peace, plural. Ishe, toward the fire. Le'Adonai, to God. Chelbo, and then it goes into the fat and the kidneys and the fat covering the innards, but there's that repetition of draw near. And the kidneys and the liver, and vehiktiru hakohen, and the Kohen will cause hamazbecha, the altar word, lechem ishel Adonai. This is a beautiful phrase. Bread or food of fire, or food to the fire to God. So it's like God is eating with humans in a meal. Ve'im ez korbano, and if his sacrifice is a goat, hikrivu, that word again, he will draw it near lifnei Adonai, before God. V'samach et yado, so much repetition, and he will put his hand al rosho ushachat, on his head, and slaughter it lifnei ohel moed, in front of the tent of meeting. V'zarku b'nei Aharon, and they will throw, the sons of Aaron, et damo al hamizbeach saviv, the blood on the altar all around. And then he talks about a fire offering to God with a fat covering the innards and the kidneys. And the Kohen will cause it to go up in smoke on the altar, consumed as a fire offering. And here's that beautiful phrase again, v'haktiram haKohen, and the Kohen will cause them, hamizbecha, to go toward the altar. Lechem ishe, a bread of fire. Lereach nichoach, to a beautiful spirit, a pleasing scent, a wind. Kol chelev, all the fat. Le'Adonai, or sacrificial fat, the fat you're not allowed to eat otherwise. And then the last line is chukat olam, another beautiful phrase. A chok is a law. Chukat olam is literally a law of the world, but le'olam also means forever. To the world means forever in Hebrew. So chukat olam, they're correct to translate it as an eternal statute. It's a little wordy. I would say a law forever, but it also means a world law. So it's like this world and the future. Ledorotechem, to your generations. Bechol mush betechem, in all your dwelling places. To moshav is a settlement. And so all of your settlements, kol chelev, all the sacrificial fat, v'chol dam, and all the blood, lo tochlu, you shall not eat. So that is the end of those passages. And let's just take I always feel somewhat demoralized when I compare the RSV, because it's always so like banal compared to, and kind of wordy and prissy almost. I'm sorry, no disrespect, compared to the Hebrew, certainly. And I'm just going to read the last two sentences so you can get a sense of that. Oh my God. And the priest shall burn them on the altar as food offered by fire. That's literally not what it says. It says bread fire in Hebrew, for a pleasing odor. Again, that's not what it says in Hebrew. It's pleasing wind, pleasing spirit. All fat is the Lord's, says the RSV, which is about the most banal sentence I've ever read in the Bible. It shall be a perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwelling places that you eat neither fat nor blood. A perpetual statute. I mean, just boring, boring, boring. I'm sorry. I don't like the translation of the Revised Standard Version. And let's see, does it really say all fat belongs to the Lord? That's how they translate it in the Revised Standard Version. They said all fat is the Lord's, but in Hebrew it's much more evocative. Kol chelev le Adonai. I guess you could say all sacrificial fat belongs to God, but it's really all sacrificial fat to God, right? Godward. So it's really aligned with this sense of things going up to God, right? All sacrificial fat, Godward. Put it in the fire, the bread of the fire. It's all going Godward. Okay, so we've come to the end. I've said what I want to say there. So let's take a look at your comments, and let's see what you have to say. Lots of comments and observations. T.A. Woody says, absolutely agree with a partial performative hypothesis. And for those who came in later, what T.A. Woody is saying is, or agreeing with, is I confessed that I found a lot of Bible reading performative or theatrical and a little off-putting in that way. I was trying to avoid that. And Nana Tracy M says, yes, because God sees and judges our heart's intent. And that's in response, I'm guessing, to my point I made at a certain point, that a constant sub-theme in these books is God really wants us to approach him willingly, not out of guilt, not out of fear, not out of being afraid of punishment, not to check a box, which was the argument that Jesus made when he came in. You guys are checking boxes. That's not what God wants. Your whited sepulchres, it's all for show. You fast and show people that you're fasting, but God doesn't care, if you're in internal thoughts are gross. So this passage definitely says, stresses takriv, come closer. It's like inviting humans to approach willingly, right? It's not like check a box or I really want that goat. Let's see. Ram von Hellcat said, I always thought that shrimp and pork usually have parasites. Well, these are deep questions that I'll have to do some research if you guys want me to get into them a little bit. The origins of kashrut law. I too have heard in Hebrew school that one reason we were encouraged by God not to eat certain shellfish, or I don't know if shrimp existed in that place and time, but certainly shrimp are not kosher today. But for instance, eels did exist, I'm sure, at that place and time in the Mediterranean, and they're not kosher, I believe. But pork also. I mean, there's some suggestion that a lot of these laws that seem kind of incomprehensible really have to do with avoiding parasites, in avoiding contagious diseases, avoiding infection. So I'll need to find out more. There may well be some truth to that, but I guess my head is in the place of yes and, right? Like God is turning out to be, such a complex and caring persona that he seems quite capable of saying, don't eat the pork because it's full of parasites. And, this is a really good way to remember me. And this will be good for you to, have some boundaries around your kind of unbounded appetites, just to practice being conscious humans, right? There's that possibility, right? That, as we saw with the sacrifice, I mean, here I'm guessing, and I'm really hoping that God doesn't, strike me down or something, because I do have a fear of getting it wrong. But to me, and the good news is in Judaism, you really are encouraged to wrestle with the text, right? There's no one interpretation. You can bring any level of knowledge you have to the text and do your best, and that's encouraged. So I'm doing that. And I guess to me, what's coming out of passages like this one, or like the very similar passages in Exodus where God was telling the children of Israel how to construct, in great detail, how to construct the tabernacle, how to melt down their earrings, like literally, how many pomegranates, how many bells. It's not for him. It's to help us have some focus and discipline and habits of self-awareness in our lives, so that we don't go off the rails with our own appetites and distraction, because that draws us away from closeness to him. So it's definitely the case that loving God requires some discipline. Being close to God requires some discipline. And that God, I think, by saying, eat this and not that, are you willing to melt down your favorite golden earrings? It's not because he's a jerk. It's because he's trying to teach us how to get in the habit of putting others before ourselves, or just get in the habit of not, I can eat every animal. I can have sex with every man, or I can have sex with every woman, like he's training our minds, right, to transcend our most base animal circumstances. And that, I don't know what you guys think about this, but that's quite a Jewish perspective, that you need to work at through a lot of effort, right? Mekadesh, being holy, being in a state to be close to God. You're not supposed to just say God will take care of it and, lie around drinking or fornicating or whatever. I'm not saying other religions say you can, but that the practice is very much part of Judaism. It always has been. And interestingly, it's what a lot of people, some people are, flee that rigorous practice, and other people are really drawn to it. The older I get, the more drawn I am to it, because I feel what a difference it makes. Because it's hard to not go crazy with your own instincts and distractions and appetites and anxieties. And so kind of God knew that we need structure. So that's what I would say. I don't think God really cares about the pork for the pork's sake, if it doesn't have parasites. I think he cares about helping us have limits. So we can, in more serious times, think, gee, I'm going through a tough patch in my marriage, but I made a vow, that looks really tempting, but I'm not going to go there, right? That's my guess. Anyway, that's the best I can do. All right. Sean Rhodes says, within Tanakh, there are what I call recursive motifs. When you know this, they pop out everywhere. I'd love to know more about that, because I'm definitely seeing recurrences, and it's like, oh, there's that again. But I don't know more than what I've shared with you. I'd love to know more. Neta Slabi says, which version do you use? So we are using the 1560 Geneva Bible, and also the Revised Standard Version as a kind of modern comparison. Usually, I find kind of a negative comparison, and then the Chabad's Masoretic text with the Hebrew. Oh, interesting. We're going to get there. Sean Rhodes, who's very knowledgeable, says Eli's worthless sons ate the fat of the Lord's sacrifices. That is very naughty. And that's in 1 Samuel chapter 2. We'll see what happens to them. It can't be good. Let's see. Sean Rhodes says, in the Brit HaChadashah, the New Covenant, the kosher laws have to do with our words, behavior, and thoughts that lead to them. Yeah. The New Covenant is what Christians think of as Jesus's kind of replacing the Old Testament covenant. And I'm not gonna say yes to that, because in my own reading, there's a lot of debate about that. I know that that's what, many Christian denominations believe, that Jesus, Yeshua, came and said, okay, that law is done. Now this is the new covenant. And, again, it has to do with your words and your actions and not with sacrifice and kosher laws. And certainly that's what Paul said in his letters. So just transparently, and I don't mean to leave you with controversy, but I love Yeshua, and I am not as big a fan of Paul, and I'm sorry. But Paul, in my mind, was a very inspired human being. He brought Yeshua's message, to millions of people who never would have had it. He deserves every credit for that. But he's not Yeshua. And Yeshua, I think, was a perfect being and may well have been a son of God in a very special way that I'm still trying to figure out, and still be Jewish. But he was also Jewish, and he was talking to Jews about Judaism. He wasn't forming a new religion. And so, he didn't say, ignore the law. What he said, and we talked about this in my videos on the Matthew translation in Hebrew, but this is true in every translation. He said, build on the seed of Moses, right? And he said, not one jot or tittle of the law will pass away before the end of the world. So he was trying to get back to the spirit that I think is clear in what God is doing here. By the time Yeshua showed up, it was thousands of years after Leviticus had been handed down or communicated or, inspired in the people who wrote it down or passed it on as oral tradition. And a lot of people had forgotten, the spiritual essence, and got bogged down, which humans do. It's not unique to Judaism, in the technicalities of the law. And so I think Yeshua was just coming back to say to Jews, go back to the spirit of what God was doing here, not disobey the law, but it's more important, just like God is saying in these texts, come tamim, come near me with, willingly. Don't get bogged down in external appearances. So that's my reading, that he was building on, or he was trying to bring Judaism back to its essence, and also to, obviously include non-Jews in following God's word. But I don't think he was abandoning Judaism. That's my view. So I hope that you guys are not really mad at me. I mean, in a kind of beautiful way, and this is very much in line with what I'm doing here, I think he was bringing the rest of the world into the covenant that God had created with the Jews, and kind of teaching a version of Judaism that was applicable to everyone, Jew or non-Jew, teaching the same ethical code, that essence of the ethical code, to everyone in the world, and saying, you don't have to be born into this tribe, you don't have to be you could be a Samaritan, you can be, you don't have to be clean, you can be a leper, you can be a prostitute, you can be a tax collector. God loves everybody, which God, clearly is saying, right, in his text, if you read it in the right way. So that's my reading. But I know these things are very emotional and very, very deeply felt, and I'm not trying to offend anyone. But I think that this, very Jewish book, Leviticus, is really a book for everybody, right? It's sort of about the start of, the children of Israel's priestly tradition. The word Jewish doesn't even exist yet, right? We barely have the 12 tribes at this point. I don't even know if we do. We have the sons of Yosef that turned into the 12 tribes, but we don't have Judea, for instance. No one's arrived at, the promised land yet. So, but it is the children of Israel. And these are, universal ethical messages. Anyone can bring an offering to God, right? And also, as I often point out, even in these early books, God is including the stranger in your house, meaning the foreigner, the non-Jew, in the ceremonies and rituals and celebrations of relationship with God that he's asking of the children of Israel. He doesn't ask as much, like there are very specific things the children of Israel are supposed to do that Yahweh is not asking of non-Jews or non-children of Israel at this point, but that doesn't mean he's closing any doors. I think it's, again, I always say it's like a model relationship. And then Yeshua, in my view, took that and said, okay, rest of the world, come on in. That's how I would read it. I'm going to stop there. I hope no one's mad at me. I'm doing my best. You may differ, but we're going to pick up again with Leviticus 4. I'm going to try to do it at 6 o'clock. I'll let you know. I'm going to try to do it within 48 hours. And I hope you have a beautiful evening. I hope this has been helpful. Let me know. And support us on Daily Clout, please. This takes a lot of staff. Believe it or not, it's not just me. It's an editor, social media person, hosting, software, all kinds of things. So we really need your help and support. And you can support me on Substack, on Outspoken, and that's where the Geneva Bible readings also live. So if you like the Geneva Bible readings, please to let me continue to do it. I do need to carve out time. I do need your support. And when you subscribe to Outspoken, you help me do that. So thank you so much. And I'm going to go away now and I'll come back within 48 hours. I'll let you know on social media. Take care. Be well.